Okay, we're going to get cranked back up here. If you could just shut that back door, just to keep the noise out of the from the hallway from coming in. So, what I'm going to do for these different styles is I'm going to set up what I call like a spectrum or something. I don't know if that's the best word for it. And you might have one extreme over on this side and one extreme over on the other side. And we're going to contrast. Guys can do it this way or they can do it this way. But remember, it's never one or the other. It's always like more, you're always somewhere in the middle. And what we're really talking about is people who operate around the middle. Someone might operate over here a little more, or over here, or someone's a little more on this side. So this is not like black or white. It's just areas of gray in terms of how people operate. Okay? And but before we do that, but that's just a little disclaimer how I want you to be thinking about this. Before we do that, I had told Andy we were sort of struggling a little bit with what I was saying earlier about how you're thinking about the pastor and parts of his personality that may or may not really be part of his ministry. Andy had an example he wanted to give, and I wanted to give him the opportunity to do that because I thought it was helpful.
Yeah, so when just a tiny thing that I didn't tell you, in 11th grade for me in high school, having Pastor Shibeli and just listening to him and his preaching, and there was a time where the personality got in the way from me receiving from him, and I had to really take that to God, and it was kind of interesting. Of course, him being a main preacher, you should take that to God if something comes like that. But after that was taken care of by God, I received so much from him, of course. And the funny example that came to my mind instantly was because what Pastor Javid brought out as a good point is, okay, are these things communicated from the pulpit or not? And sometimes it can be.
Right.
And, a discerning believer sitting in the chair has to understand, this is an anointed message, and this is a man being used by God, and, things can be said.
Yeah.
And so we enjoy it. If there is grace for the person that you're receiving from, then it
Right.
doesn't matter really, because you have a capacity to receive and to understand, what is of God, and then what is just really embellishing for fun, and it's life, Yeah. So then the example was that you could have, like Pastor Shibeli says, and Starbucks, and he's preaching against Starbucks, and it's like, where did that even come from in his message? Somehow he's talking about Starbucks, and it's just in his brain, and it will never leave him, Starbucks. Right. And then next thing you know, you're with a few people at Starbucks, and you are like, should we be drinking from here? This is like something like, I feel like there's a conviction inside of me somehow against Starbucks, and I'm not even sure how it got there. And you are wondering, am I just following a man's opinion, or have I thought about this?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very good. I mean, maybe even something as simple, Andy, as just like the guy tells a joke that's not funny to you. It's like, am I off? Am I not in the spirit because that was not funny? You know what I'm saying? Maybe he tells bad jokes, So anyway, thank you for that. I just wanted to maybe spend a few more minutes on that, just to help us. So we're talking about these three different leadership style traits: definition, how involved the person wants to be with details, and really what the expectations are from the team. And these are like I said, these are trends. But the first one I want to draw, and we're gonna draw it this way. And this is how the person gives definition. What is he? How does he tend to get the church moving in a certain direction? And I'm not saying these are the best terms, but the way I would describe it is, one extreme might be what I call like top down, and then at the other side of it would be what I would call collegial. That's not a word we use very often. But top-down means that it's the pastor's going to give the definition. This is the way it's going to go, you know? And so it puts the congregation or the staff in a place where we are waiting to hear definition from our pastor before proceeding. Okay, so that's one extreme. Now, the other extreme would be where decisions are made by the group. You know what I'm saying? I guess you could take that all the way to, like, the far extreme might be like it's sort of a democracy where the church is going to vote and the majority is going to rule, but that's not so much something for us to think about. But it's more, we're gonna meet together and we're going to have a consensus on how we're going to proceed, and then we're going to proceed. And I'm just, all I'm saying is that you, the men you serve under, will be at different places on this spectrum. And sometimes they'll be on one side of it, sometimes they'll be on the other, but there will be a tendency for them to gravitate towards one over the other. It's not right, it's not wrong. It's just how people think. It's how they view themselves before God and how they see themselves as a minister. And I think that you can have, like, a guy maybe over on this side, or maybe that's a little bit too far out there, but tending towards that direction. And that man, I think, to be there really has a view of himself as hearing from God, you know? And it's my place as the pastor, it's my gift that God is going to give me definition to how to lead this church. And when I get that definition from God, I got to put it out there to people because I got to obey God. You know what I'm saying? It's like, at its extreme, it's like, don't talk to me, don't talk to me, talk to God. God told me this. This is how He's leading me to lead the church, and come on, get on the train, because we are going in this direction, you know. And I could comment on that as I want to be in a place where if my pastor's hearing from God, by all means, I want him passing that on to us, and I want to fall into line with that vision. Now, I would say that, in my opinion, 9 times out of 10, and this is an opinion, this is how I think, this might be my opinion, maybe you might have a different one, but this is just, I think it's worthy of consideration. In my opinion, 9 times out of 10, or maybe 99 times out of 100, that if the leader hears something from God about a direction that he would be going, he can test that by putting it out and having a discussion about, what do you think about this? This is how I'm thinking about this. What are you, plural, thinking about this? And that through that discussion, it will become clear that indeed we are hearing from God. And yes, we are going to go in that direction. The advantage of it is that the pastor has what I call buy-in from the body. People have a sense of participation. They have a sense that they have a voice, which taken rightly can be important. The negative side of that is that if you put too much emphasis on hearing from the body, that there'll be times when the pastor is hearing from God and he's putting definition out there where God wants to take the church. And the churches, because they've been given the choice, they say, no, we're not going to go. We're not so interested in going in that direction. And in that sense, the Spirit can get squelched, Now, maybe just an example at home, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong. It might sound arrogant. I don't think it is. But like in terms of me teaching this course, I pretty much feel like there's certain things that I've learned over the years that can benefit you all. And so in that sense, I kind of like have written this course myself, And if the Bible College would come to me and they were to say, Pastor Taggart, we want you to teach this course. We want you to use this textbook and follow closely with the textbook. I might say to them, I cannot do that. I don't know what I would, but I just feel I want to be teaching stuff that I'm excited about, that I feel like I really have a portion from God on. Understand what I'm saying? So again, I don't know if that's arrogant or if I'm really hearing from God or what that is, but I'm just telling you that's how I might make a decision in this situation if I were asked to do the course substantially differently from the way I do it. I'm just not your guy, Pastor O'Connell. I don't want to do that. That's not my gift. I feel like there's some things some maybe unique things, maybe not unique, but unusual things that I can really help people with that I'm excited about doing. And you can put yourself in the same position, or the same thought process as a pastor. I'm called, I don't know what the example would be. I start a ministry somewhere, and I just believe that, well, I'm going to give an example, but I'm not going to name the church, and it could be anywhere on the face of the earth. Hopefully it won't be, and I'm not that close. I could get this wrong. But there was a church I know of that the nature of the pastor that was there was that he had the ability to reach middle class and upper middle class people, which if you had that ability, that's like, I'm all for that. That's like amazing. I don't think I have that ability so well. I think I do better, on Monument Street, what I'm saying? That's just has been my ministry, North Adams, Massachusetts, Bennington, Vermont, some of these places, Catskill, New York, and East Baltimore. I do better in those places. But this guy, he had that ministry in a certain place in the world, and he had, these people that were professionals in the church, accountants, people with good jobs, and certain place in the city. And then that pastor left, another pastor came, and he had a different ministry. And that church has really transitioned from like I say, an upper middle class church into a church that is really ministering to primarily a lot of immigrant, international type population, And that's just who that guy was. And I don't think he necessarily had the gift to reach the people that were in the church, but he took the church in a direction, and I think he did it against opposition. And I think a lot of the people that were opposed, the majority of them have left the church and gone to churches that were more like churches they wanted to be in. And that's just the way it is. So in that case, I'm just saying the pastor got what he had from God and went with it. And at times we're all going to be in that situation where we just have something from God and we got to go with it. But I'm saying some men find themselves in that situation on a larger percentage basis than other people, just because how they perceive their relationship with God and what they're hearing in their prayer life and how they perceive it. I would say that men that have that tendency in some situations, and this is my experience having been around a while, the downside of that is the people under that ministry can find those men to be sometimes erratic, at times. I'm not saying it's a pattern, but God's leading us to do this, and then 3 months later, wait a minute, no, God's leading us to do that. So if you're in the church, that could bother you. It's like if you let it bother you. But if you realize that different men are different and that maybe there's sometimes people can think they're hearing from God, but they didn't, even though they preached it from the pulpit that they were, but they had to change. If you can live with that and it doesn't bother your conscience, you're going to be fine in that church, But if, the pastor says something and every time he says it, you get yourself 100% involved with it and you start praying and investing your whole life into that, and then things change, and then that bothers you, like, was I off with God? Like, how did this happen? Then that might not be a good leader for you to be under, okay? So I'm just talking about kind of what I call like a top-down leadership, and some of the characteristics of it, maybe some of the pitfalls, and some of the things that you might experience being in that church, and then some of us that believe we have the calling of being not so much an assisting pastor, but really being an overseeing pastor. Be aware of these things. Be aware of how it might affect people and maybe how you might adjust and conduct your ministry, So that's like one end. And then the other end of that, like what I call the definition. This is the definition spectrum. Definition spectrum here. The other end of that would be like the collegial, or we're going to sit down and talk about it, and we're going to decide together where we're going to head. Now, in this course, I definitely am pushing you in that direction because I think a common error that is made especially with young men starting off their ministries, is they get overly excited about their ability to be hearing from God, and they get a little bit insecure, and they think they have to be giving definition from the pulpit, and this is from God, and if they're hearing from people about it, somehow that's a failure in their ministry, or somehow that's questioning who they are before God, which it is not. And I think that they would do better and have a happier team if they go in the direction of paying the price of hearing from people, getting those opinions, sitting around the table, talking about it, and in a sense, some cases maybe being corrected or steered by the people that are around them. And that's like over on the collegial side. Collegial means just a college is a group of people. That's at its root word. I don't, to go back into the etymology of that word, but that's what we mean by collegial. Sitting around and having a conversation, and a group of people have influence over the decision. That's what I'm talking about. Now, over on the collegial side, again, there's good things about it. People have buy-in, people feel like they have a voice, but there can be a downside to that also, where if a decision is sat around, discussed, and talked about, like I've got a seat at the table, and I state my opinion, but you know what? The group goes against it. The pastor says, overrules, thank you for that opinion, I appreciate that, but we're going to go in this direction. In some cases, that can really bother me if I really have a strong opinion about it. And because it was a team decision, supposedly, I'm saying in terms of how we think about it, and it seems like this group that were on this side had louder voices, we got run over in it, and I walk away, and in a sense, in my heart or in my mind, I could look at that decision that was made as being, that wasn't from God. That was just louder voices swayed a group, and we went in that direction. And then I could really have some heart problems about what's going on. Number one, I ended up on the losing side. And number two, I'm looking at a godly decision as being like a common decision. That was not really even a godly process. That was just a majority made it. How come they're not hearing from me who's hearing from God? So that's the type of things that can cause. And then the other thing is, on the collegial, if the pastor has to spend that time, things can move slower. Maybe he wants to do. He can burn up some months of his life getting a bunch of opinions, getting everybody in the room, talking to the elders and talking to body members. That can just maybe take more of his time than it should be taking. So I'm illustrating decision, how the definition comes, how the church makes decisions, and that different pastors can act differently in that venue, and you or me under him can be experiencing that. And we need to, I think it's very wise for us to recognize it and be able to deal with it and see it for what it is and for what it isn't. Okay? So that's like spectrum number one, how definition comes to the church. Okay? And then also, I think, maybe just to comment a little more on that, I think there's certain things that, like I say, they are non-negotiable. And if you're leading a church and you think we're going to, you hear from God and your wisdom is that we're going to go in this direction, maybe in some cases you would make a decision. In this case, I am not interested in hearing from people, And if you're a guy who generally does, who your track record is sitting around the table and gathering opinions, and that's just the way you operate, and then one day you stand up and say, you know what, we're going in this direction, you might find that the people in your church, because you've developed trust, they know you generally don't operate this way. They'll say, hey, you know what? If Pastor, so-and-so was doing this, he always asked, this must really be from God. People can receive it very well, But what people, of course, will have trouble, trouble receiving is when a spur-of-the-moment decision is made that people have questions about, and then they start bearing the fallout of it, that the problems that come about as that decision fall on the congregation. That will trouble people over time, But I don't think any of us want to be in a church that's a democracy. That's not why we're here. Those churches are all over the place. We want to be in a church where God is moving and where things I was years ago, I was in a certain Christian group on a college campus in a place, and the phrase was, find a church that you're comfortable in, And it's like I heard that, and I understand what they're saying, but no, I'm looking for a church that I'm uncomfortable in the good sense, that's going to challenge me. That's Pastor Stephen's statement. You lose your life through soul winning, through prayer, and what's the third thing? The Word of God. Okay, and I add a fourth thing, which is the body life. I believe is a fourth way to lose your life, and that's why I wanted to come here, because I knew it challenged me. I knew I would have to be a different person, and only God can do that with me. I didn't want to be in a church that was comfortable. Sit around, hear a good message from the Bible, and then go talk about a football game, and that's all we do. That's not for me. Okay, so this is spectrum number 1. I've explained it. Any questions or comments on that? And I know you may be running out of steam this time of night. Yes, let's get the mic over to Lisa. Is it green? You got to, yep.
Shall I boil it? As I understood rightly, the extreme parts are sort of wrong, so it must be somewhere in the middle.
Right.
The right decision. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm not saying a pastor is one or the other, and I'm not even saying the right way is in the middle. I mean, sometimes one will be right, sometimes the other one will be right. There might be a situation where, the decision that Pastor Schaller made about church service times on Sunday. I don't think he was just like, what can the body respond to? That was the basis of that decision. What's going to work? I don't think it was like he was hearing from God. He was hearing from us and was trying to make a decision based on. Not that he wasn't hearing. You know what I'm saying? But so there's some decisions like that. Like a silly example would be like, I could care less what color the walls are in the finance office. If the people that work there are happy, my God, paint the color. I'm not trying to get something from God on that. So that's. Lisa, just remind me. How many people? You were married to Pastor Bob. He passed away a few years ago. Did he pastor a church? Yes. Okay, give her back the microphone. I just want you to give me a 2-minute history of his ministry.
He came to St. Petersburg in '93, I think, and he started teaching in Bible college. But it was 1 year before he graduated from Bible college here, so he sort of went to the mission field before.
Right.
So then he came back, he graduated, he came to Russia again, and he continued teaching, and he was pastoring the suburb church like every Saturday going out of the city. And
was that Medvedjegorsk or some other place?
No, it was Stiklyanny, and
which I'm not familiar
just
with.
short electric train trip, very cold.
Yeah.
Wooden benches, just torture. Never mind. But he was on trips to Medvedjegorsk also, not like 4 times a month, just maybe once a month, sometimes rare, because there were pastors that were going also. Pastor Sean Stevens, he stayed in Medvedjegorsk for a year, and then Pastor Alpa was there. And then in 2002, we went to Almaty because it was a very difficult situation to stay in St. Petersburg Church because of the split. Mm. He tried to talk to our pastor who was in St. Petersburg. He is American. And we don't do this in Greater Grace. What are you doing? So he said, you better go to the psychologist. Shall I introduce you to a good doctor?
Wow.
Yes.
That was said to your husband?
So bad.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, in St. Petersburg. And then we decided to go to Almaty because Pastor Dima was there.
Right.
Pastor Dima was also it started with him when the split was done. So it was a wonderful time in Almaty, and then Pastor Dima was taken home to Jesus. So
Right.
my husband was for a while pastor in church, and then Pastor Matti came in Almaty. He started, and we were in the team. So when in 2005, in May, in June, we were here for convention, Pastor Schaller started being the leader of this church
Right.
in April or May.
Yeah.
And there was a question that people in St. Petersburg are meeting and they don't have a pastor because the other pastor took the whole congregation out
Yep.
of Greater
Yep.
Grace, just saying that everybody's opinion was
Right.
unanimous. And then my husband decided to come back to St. Petersburg. And that's how he was pastor in the church there till his death.
Okay, that's what I want. That's perfect. Thank you. And the reason I say this is just that those of us who have had like direct experience with an overseeing pastor, that's like it's very valuable. And just as you know, those of you who have been in that situation, as you have comments and illustrations that relate to the class, I'm very interested in those. And it really brings life when you're able to do that. Okay, yes, sir. Yeah, we do. Yeah, we'll carry this over to the next lecture because we're not going to finish tonight.
When you were speaking on the comfortable church,
Right.
was that on the collegial side of the spectrum?
Why did I say that?
It's a two-part question.
What I was talking about is I was saying that I want to be in a church where the pastor is hearing from God and God is moving us in places that may be uncomfortable to me. That's what I'm saying. I don't want to be a church where every decision we sit around and we all agree on it. That was my point.
Yeah, because I want a definition on that statement because I don't think there is a problem with a comfortable church.
Yeah, well, I think it depends on what you mean by comfort.
Yeah, because
If it's natural,
essentially-
I'm talking about where you end up with natural flesh comfort. That's what I don't want. But I'm spiritually comfortable in this church. I mean, you know what I'm saying? So it's, I think,
No, it's
in the good
not,
sense.
Nothing like that. It's
Yeah.
because like that example you used when Pat Schaller brought up the service time so that
Right.
people could go watch a football game.
Right.
I mean, that's comfortable. I mean, if you think
Yeah,
about
I
it,
see what you're saying.
Yeah. So I guess you can't really put a
Yeah,
tag
so
on it.
I'm just using certain words that depending on how you interpret them. I got you on that. Okay, so I think that's what I want to say about the spectrum in terms of how definition comes down, how leadership, gets going the way it wants to get going. Okay, anything else? Oh, it's not now or never. Yes, sir.
Just looking at 1 Chronicles 21 and how David, he wanted to number the people. But Joab didn't like that. So his right-hand man wanted to challenge him
Right.
on the issue. And then we find out in the story that Joab was right. But I'm just wondering, was David not listening to Joab because Joab actually killed his son some
Right.
chapters before? So what would happen in the instance where you have the pastor, where there's an event that has taken place and it's affected him somehow, but he's making judgment calls and thinking he's hearing from God? How would you deal with a situation like that?
Well, my immediate response to it, and again, I have to also disclaim, Richard, that I've never pastored a church. Some of these situations I have not really been directly, and I've been close to them, but not in them. But certainly in the Bible, in the reference you cite, and my immediate response is, there's some things that God has to deal with. You know what I'm saying? And that's what happened here, right? And so, am I going to, so I'm going to take like Pastor Schaller, and a few years ago, let me just try and set up the scenario here. A few years ago, I ran over one of his children with my car by mistake, killed, in a car wreck or something by mistake. And And then and then if I'm gonna start interpreting all his decisions in light of that incident and not believe the best that is behind him and he is going forward, making good decisions, then it's over. You know what I'm saying? We have to keep ourselves pure before God. And then also there is an aspect, which I don't talk about this a lot because I don't want to emphasize it, but even, in God's plan, even wrong decisions are right. We got to be very careful with that statement. But you know what I mean? If the pastor makes a mistake and it's wrong, can I live with it? I mean, if he's making mistakes all the time, okay. But if he makes one once in a while, that's he does. Okay, so I think it's 7 minutes till 9. Richard, we got 3 people losing it. I think we're going to give God a hand for tonight's class, all right? And we'll be dismissed. Thank you, everybody. And we'll pick up here next week.